These folks, they just went on a trip to the moon and came back, or so they say, right? And some people have questions about that, whether they did or not. As you can see, it's a diversity group. It's got a black man, a woman, Canadian, and an American. And this is somewhat of a contrast with what happened in 1969 with Neil Armstrong and Michael Collins and Buzz Aldrin. You know, they were, all three of them were white, all three males, and all three of them were born in 1930. Two of them are dead now, except for Buzz. He's 96 years old. Tells you something about, you know, the fact that people live longer these days, right? Okay, so one of the questions someone asked me is whether we went to the moon in 1969. You know, a lot of people have questions about that. And they say, well, you know, was it true? Did we have technology? Why did we wait so long to go back there again? And so on and so forth, okay? And so here you see the trip. It's quite a lengthy trip. Remember, it's 200,000 kilometers away. It's like 1 light second away from the Earth. That's where the moon is. Round trip, you're talking about above 3 seconds, you know, if you traveled at the speed of light. And so here's the liftoff. This is what they say happened, 1969, okay? And the question whether this is really happened or was just, you know, a hoax to convince people that, you know, that we could go to the moon and land people on the moon, etc. Here the eagle lands, and then the eagle comes back out again, goes back to Earth, okay, all the way back to Earth. Did this happen? And the question, you know, people say, well, why did we wait so long? Did we have the technology to go back there again? Why now? You know, what's going on? And part of the answer to that question, at least, is, you know, in the 60s, there was a fight between Soviet Union, United States. There was this arms race, there's space race, and today that space race is now apparently being taken over by China. So again, the Chinese apparently are interested suddenly of going to the moon. They've got a little bit of cash in their pockets, and the United States might be worried that it might be used for military reasons, aside from the fact that, you know, you plant your flag there and suddenly, you know, the moon is yours. Like Columbus, you know, this land is our land, you know. Okay, so this is Artemis's flight, okay? And the issue here is that you see it up there, the Artemis 2, a historic 10-day mission around the moon, marking the first human lunar journey. Not landing, but journey in over 50 years. So here we have 50 years that no one has gone to the moon now with manned spacecraft, right? And now we're going out there. So the question is, why now? You know, is it possible that maybe we did not have the technology in 1969 and it was all done in Hollywood? That's the thought that goes through the minds of so many people. So it's 10-day mission performed, lunar flyby. Wasn't, you know, it wasn't a landing. It was just a flyby. Just went around the moon, came back. Interesting fact, mission experienced minor issues, including toilet malfunctions, okay? But the crew remained in high spirits. Well, thank God. You know, I guess they had to poop out the window or something. Who knows? And the mission sets the stage for the Artemis 3 mission, which aims to land astronauts near the lunar South Pole in when? 2028. That's at least 2 years away. And again, that also must raise an eyebrow, you know, in some people who say, hold it, you know, okay, so we sent a probe to the moon. Why can't we send one next month or in 2 months or in a year? Why wait 2 years? What's going on? Don't we have technology to do this anymore? Or what's going on? You know, so people have those concerns, okay, and they have questions. And before I can talk about that, I have to talk to you about history. And people have wrong ideas about history, okay? And that's where the problem is. Let me give you, for instance, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Did Julius Caesar, Napoleon, JFK, did they even exist? Were they ever on the earth, or were they hoaxes? I'm going to play devil's advocate and say that never happened. Those people were never around. So, baloney. And you say, hold it, how can you say Julius Caesar, Napoleon, JFK did not exist? Yeah, that's what I'm going to argue. Prove to me that they existed. And yeah, the issue with history is that it's all gossip, it's all hearsay. We just read from the books from someone who wrote the book, who heard it from someone else, who heard it from someone else, who heard it from someone else, and that goes all the way to 2,000 years ago to Julius Caesar. So all of history is really hearsay. I can't prove Julius Caesar. I can't bring him in a court of law to prove, in a lawsuit that Julius Caesar did in fact exist 2,000 years ago. Even if he came through the time tunnel or you bring me a film of Julius Caesar, that wouldn't prove that he exists. And so you got to think about that. You can't prove history. History is handled in a different way, and pretty much like in science, in physics, you have to make an assumption. And the jury or the public, the crowd, they're supposed to take your assumption at face value. They have to accept it, not because they believe it. They have to accept it in order to understand the theory that is founded upon those assumptions. Okay, and so you can make an assumption like you're going to explain how the world came to be. Okay, so you begin your presentation saying, "Let us assume that God exists." You say, someone stands up, says, "I don't believe that God exists. That's wrong." The other guy says, "Oh, but I do believe that God exists." Okay, so what should we do? Should we accept God existing, God not existing? Irrelevant. The guy's making an assumption. The theorist is making an assumption. He's saying, let us assume that God exists. Now with this assumption, please accept it at face value. I'm going to explain how the universe was made. So the theory is how the universe was made. That's the mechanism. That's the theory. That's the explanation. Not the issue of God. You can always question the assumptions. That doesn't take away from that. But right now, we're not interested in whether God exists or not. He's making an assumption that God exists. Okay? And so you got to keep that in mind. And so the question is, did Neil Armstrong, did he exist? I can take it as far as anybody wants, play devil's advocate and say, hey, Neil Armstrong did not exist. Forget about the lunar landing. He never was around. And so, you can take that as far as you want. And the issue is, again, it's a question of, history you cannot prove. You cannot prove what happened because you cannot reproduce the same event today. And even if you did, it didn't. You're not proving that it happened then in the past. Okay? So keep all that in mind. So people raise objections against, whether, we actually went to the moon. And so here are some of my arguments that I raise against them, saying that, I think they did go to the moon. And I make that assumption all the time. And people say, oh, Bill, you're such a gullible nut. You believe in everything they tell you. And no, it's a question of, I have reasons to make this assumption that they did go to the moon. And I can explain with that why there are flags on the moon or whatever, right? There are theories, and I'm going to vouch for them going to the moon. And here are some of the objections I have against people who don't believe that we went to the moon or who don't accept that assumption, okay? So the question is, humans did have the technology to send unmanned spacecrafts to the moon. We did send many probes before we sent humans out there. Okay, Mariner 4, the first flyby to Mars, 1965, 4 years before what is it? Forgot the name of the Apollo 11 went to to the moon. Okay, so 4 years before that, they already had probes that went all the way to Mars, let alone the moon. We had already many probes going to the moon. NASA placed also satellites into orbit. How did they do that if we never left the Earth, right? Then you have this issue of the ISS, the International Space Station. It's still orbiting the Earth every hour, and we built it over 10 years, piece by piece, by sending astronauts to assemble the parts. In fact, the whole thing, these shuttles, right? They were made specifically for that, to construct the ISS, and it took them 10 years to do this. And here, let me show you the ISS construction. This is more or less how the different parts were assembled over a 10-year period. Okay, little by little, they were making these parts, okay, until the shuttle was built. Until the ISS was built. And if you don't believe that, well, you can still do this. You can go up there. Here, let me show you this. This is a fellow who kept track of the ISS with his telescope, and he filmed it. Okay, there you see the ISS on the right, lower right. And that's that little dot in the sky. And the question is, you may not believe in the in all this space program or any of it, but here, you can take your telescope and see it if you have a telescope, or go to your friend's house and say, hey, let's prove this. Let's see if it's still up there. And yeah, the issue there is that people don't want to believe certain things, and they can prove it to themselves if they really want to. They can really show that there is a thing up there, because all they have to do is take their telescope. I mean, if you need proof. I've never done it, okay? I've never done it. I've never seen the ISS up there, okay? So do I just believe because I believe? No, because I'm sure it's a lie that no one's going to make on something that is so verifiable by so many people on Earth. So a lot of people could question, hey, you don't see it. And, NASA has the orbit, the trajectory of the ISS, so you can just look at the schedule and say, oh, when is that ISS coming around my house? I'll just point to it, or have a friend who's got a telescope or whatever point and show you that it's true, that there is an ISS up there, okay? And here are other arguments that I have. One is that the Soviet government did not contradict the U.S. Now remember, the Soviets, they were heavily into this thing about going out into space, and there was a big competition between them. Okay, here you have the in fact, 3 days before Armstrong went up in the air over there, the Soviets had already sent this Luna 15, and here you see the trajectory of the Luna 15. This happened before. 3 days before the Apollo went up in the air. So these guys were already sending unmanned probes. This was a probe that went to the moon, and they just wanted to collect rocks, but it failed. It crashed on the moon, as you'll see here. It just blew up, and so they weren't able to prove, to collect rocks, really. And but the point here is that they were able to send a probe to the moon. So both the United States and the Soviet Union, they were sending probes out there, and to say that we never went to space, because we can't send probes out there, I mean, here you have two enemies. Why would they work in tandem, in agreement to fool each one, I guess, their own people? No, there are too many things wrong with that argument. But let me give you another fatal argument that I see with the no moon landing theory or argument, whatever. And that is, we do not need to get into discussion about each and every photograph and shadows and angle and errors committed by those who filmed the fake moon landing movie that was made in Hollywood, right? And suffice to say that first, that the errors you find, the less tenable, the more errors that you find, the less tenable your conspiracy argument. Okay. Now let me justify that. Okay. So here people say, well, we never went to the moon, right? Because of the distance too long, and then they say all the images are wrong. You know, the gravity is not right. There's no stars in the background. The angles are wrong. The shadows are wrong. You know, they go through all this stuff, right? There's hundreds of arguments, by the way. There's just too many to cover today, but we don't need to look at any of them. Okay. What we need to do is look at them as a whole. And this is the argument. Imagine you watch a movie. Okay, you watch a movie. It's made by Hollywood, by MGM, right? So we have a big corporation putting a few $1 million to make this movie. And it's a movie, a documentary about the Romans. And it's not a comedy. It's supposed to be serious, right? Because they're talking about history, etc. And you see this gladiator. And he's got his sword. And he's going to be beating up someone in the Colosseum. And it turns out he's got a Rolex watch on his right wrist. And everybody sees that and says, oh, look at that. He's got a Roman with a Rolex watch. I mean, how dumb is the director who allowed that, that scene to make it to the final cut? And let's make it even worse now. Turns out while they're fighting, in the distance you see a train going from one place to another. And even worse, the camera goes above the Colosseum, and suddenly you see all these Japanese pagodas instead of Roman houses. I mean, how many errors can you make? And so here's the argument. The argument is, don't tell me all the errors that NASA made in its film. It's all the errors that happened in 1969 when they were going to the moon and coming back. Tell me the opposite. What you got to show me is that this was a perfect movie if it was done in Hollywood. If it was done in Hollywood, they couldn't have put Rolex watches. They could not have had trains in the background. They could not have had pagodas. I mean, if you have that kind of errors, then something is definitely wrong with the director and all the people who made the movie. Now, here you have all these movie makers, right? And NASA paid them good money. NASA spends millions of dollars to keep all this army of people working on all these projects. And let's just assume it's done to fool the public. Okay, so it's all a hoax, right? Never happened, right? All these people just act like if they're working, right? And here they're going to make the movie that's going to impress 200 million people, 300 million people, that we went to the moon. And here come the directors and the actors from and the editors, whatever, from Hollywood, and they make all these errors in spite of the fact that they have all these engineers, all these physicists, biologists, etc., coaching them and saying, oh, you got to watch about this, you got to watch the shadows, you got to watch the angles, you got to watch the stars in the background. They would have covered every base and said, don't let this show because they're going to question that. They would have made a perfect movie. Okay? So you don't have to show me all the errors that NASA's movies have, right? You got to show me the opposite. You got to show me that this was done on Earth, and if it was done on Earth, it had better not have any errors.